McDonald's franchisees don't pay McDonald's for the burgers, the fries, or the secret sauce. They pay McDonald's for the dirt underneath the building. That's the business. It's been hiding inside a company that sold you Ronald McDonald and Happy Meals for 60 straight years. There are more than 38,000 McDonald's restaurants in over 100 countries, serving roughly 70 million people a day. Somewhere in the world, one opens or reopens every few hours. It is by almost any measure, the most successful restaurant franchise in human history. And McDonald's Corporation, the publicly traded company, barely sells any food. Over 93% of those 38,000 restaurants are owned and operated by independent franchisees. Not McDonald's itself. Those franchisees buy the beef, fry the fries, staff the counter, and keep whatever's left over. McDonald's Corporation touches almost none of that. So what does the corporation actually collect? Rent and royalties, in that order. By the end of this video, you'll understand why the company that put a burger stand on every commercial corner in America is, structurally, one of the largest commercial landlords on earth. And why the license to sell that food is one of the hardest $10 menus in the world to get approved for. Let's start with what it costs to get in. To become a McDonald's franchisee, you need a minimum of $500,000 in non-borrowed personal liquidity just to be considered for evaluation. That's not the total cost. That's the entry ticket to the conversation. The full initial investment to open a single restaurant franchise fee, kitchen equipment, signage, seating, technology, and required opening capital ranges from roughly $1 million to $2-3 million, depending on whether you're building new, converting a location, or taking over one that's already open. The initial franchise fee itself is around $45,000. That fee alone does almost nothing. It buys you the right to be evaluated, trained, and eventually assigned a location, if you're approved at all. And approval is not guaranteed by having the money. McDonald's runs a years-long vetting process before you're ever handed the keys. You do not simply buy a McDonald's. You are selected to operate one. Now, here's where the real business model starts to show itself. Once you're approved and open, you don't own your restaurant's real estate. In the vast majority of cases, McDonald's does. The corporation either owns the land outright or holds a long-term lease on it. Then subleases that property back to you, the franchise, at a markup. You then pay McDonald's rent for the privilege. It's typically structured as a base minimum plus a percentage of your gross sales, often somewhere between 8% and 15% of everything you ring up at the register. On top of that, you pay an ongoing royalty of about 4% of sales for the right to use the brand, the system, and the name. Add those together and a franchisee is handing McDonald's between 12% and 19% of every dollar that crosses the counter before paying for beef, buns, labor, utilities, or insurance. Unlike the franchisee, McDonald's collects that percentage regardless of whether the location turns a profit that quarter. Rent and royalties are owed on gross sales, not net income. This is the arrangement Harry Sunborn, the man who engineered McDonald's financial structure in the 1950 seconds, laid out to Wall Street in blunt terms. The company was not, in his words, in the food business. It was in the real estate business, using cheap hamburgers as the mechanism to generate rent-paying tenants. That framing still holds today. McDonald's owns land and buildings worth tens of billions of dollars on its balance sheet. And that portfolio functions less like a restaurant chain, and more like a globally diversified apartment complex that happens to have a kitchen in every unit. Rental income has consistently made up well over a quarter of the corporation's total revenue, with rents and royalties combined accounting for the majority of everything McDonald's collects from its franchised system. McDonald's real estate strategy is disciplined for exactly this reason. Site selection isn't left to franchisee instinct. Real estate teams evaluate traffic counts, drive time demographics, competing intersections, and long-term area growth before a franchise is ever allowed to apply for that location. McDonald's is choosing where the future money is, then renting the right to sell burgers there, which means the franchisee's success and McDonald's success are aligned, but not equally exposed to risk. If a location does exceptionally well, the franchisee's upside is capped by the percentage they owe. If a location struggles, McDonald's still banks its minimum rent. The franchisee absorbs the downside of a bad year. The corporation is largely insulated from it. Here's what that looks like for the average owner. A typical McDonald's location does around $2.7 million annual sales, After rent, royalties, food costs, and labor, the majority of franchisees walk away with roughly $150,000 a year in profit, a number that hasn't moved much in over a decade. McDonald's, meanwhile, has already collected its 12 to 19% off the top of that $2.7 million, whether the franchisee's final number was $150,000 or $15,000. In a recent year, McDonald's roughly 2,700 company-run restaurants generated about $9.4 billion in direct sales. Its 3,600 plus franchised restaurants, which the corporation barely touches operationally, generated over $11.6 billion in rent and royalty revenue alone. Fewer than 7% of the stores were company-operated, and they still weren't the more efficient half of the business. Owning the tenant relationship beat owning the operation. Because you don't own the land, your restaurant's survival is tied to a contract, not a deed. Franchise agreements typically run 20 years. If you fall behind on remodeling requirements, or breach the terms of your lease, McDonald's can decline renewal or terminate the relationship. And when that happens, you don't just lose a business. You lose the real estate, because you never owned it. Everything you built inside that box reverts to a location that was only ever borrowed. That's not hypothetical. In May 2024, George Michel, one of McDonald's largest and most successful individual franchisees, operating 37 restaurants, filed a federal lawsuit, claiming the company was using its updated franchise standards to squeeze him out of the system entirely, refusing to approve his own daughter as his successor unless he agreed to sell. McDonald's called the claims meritless. The lawsuit is still one of the clearest public examples of exactly how much leverage the corporation holds over an owner. Once that 20-year contract comes up for renewal, required remodels compound the pressure. In late 2024, McDonald's rolled out what it called its bigger, bolder vision: updated kitchens, new dining layouts, digital ordering kiosks, and pushed the cost onto franchisees, often running into the hundreds of thousands of dollars per location. The response was immediate. Franchisees formed the National Owners Association, an independent advocacy group that has since grown to represent more than 1,000 operators, specifically to push back on standards they didn't negotiate and can't opt out of without risking their franchise agreement. It isn't the only lawsuit hanging over the system. A group of more than 50 former black franchisees has separately accused McDonald's of steering them toward lower revenue, higher crime locations for decades while offering white franchisees. The stronger cites a case, seeking roughly $1 billion in damages. McDonald's has denied the allegations and the case has moved through multiple rounds of dismissal and amendment, but it points at the same underlying lever. Every one of these disputes runs through. The corporation decides who gets which piece of real estate, and that single decision can define a franchisee's entire financial future before they've sold a single burger. And the timing could not be worse. In the first quarter of 2025, McDonald's U.S. same-store sales fell 3.6%, the steepest domestic decline the company had posted since the pandemic shutdowns of 2020. CEO Chris Kempczynski told investors that traffic from consumers earning under $45,000 a year had dropped by double digits, with middle-income traffic not far behind. Only high-income customers kept showing up at the same rate. McDonald's answer was to lean harder into discounting, expanding its extra value meals to roughly 30% of all U.S. transactions and pushing average discount levels toward 15%. That's a defensible strategy for winning back traffic. It is also a strategy that pulls average check size down at the exact moment franchisees are being asked to absorb rising remodel costs and beef prices that have climbed double digits over the past year. The company that built its entire identity on being the cheap, reliable option was watching its cheapest customers walk away first, then spending more to win them back. That's the paradox sitting underneath every franchise agreement right now. You're required to keep reinvesting hundreds of thousands of dollars into an asset you'll never own, on a schedule set by someone else. At the exact moment the traffic that pays for it is shrinking. The rent is fixed. The remodel bill is fixed. The customer count is not. This is the mechanism that makes McDonald's one of the most resilient businesses in American capitalism, even while individual franchisees are suing the company, and traffic is sliding. It isn't betting on a burger being popular next quarter. It's collecting rent on land it strategically acquired decades ago, in locations it selected using data most operators never see. From tenants who are contractually obligated to pay whether their store has a good month or a terrible one. McDonald's sells over 38,000 franchises worth of hamburgers a day. The company barely touches the hamburgers. It collects the rent on the real estate underneath them, the royalty on the name above the door, and it leaves the food business, the labor, the risk, the thin margins on beef and buns to the roughly 6,000 individual owner-operators, who signed up believing they were buying a restaurant. If this is how the most recognizable brand in fast food actually makes its money, it's worth asking the same question about the businesses everyone assumes are simple. The gas station on your corner, the car wash, the strip mall laundromat. We broke down exactly that in our video on why gas stations are one of the riskiest businesses in America. Watch that next if you want to see the same pattern play out with underground fuel tanks instead of dining rooms. They didn't buy a restaurant. They bought a long-term lease with a burger attached. You decide who actually owns McDonald's. Word count, 1,748.